At the Paris AI Summit, US Vice President JD Vance took a very firm stance against what he called, quote, excessive regulation of AI, delivering a sharp rebuke to European efforts to impose strict controls on the rapidly advancing technology. He actually started off his speech saying, literally, quote, I'm not here this morning to talk about AI safety, which was the title of the conference a couple years ago. I'm here to talk about AI opportunity. So this was his first kind of major policy event since the Trump administration has taken office. And in this, Vance, over about 15 minutes, framed AI as an economic turning point. He compared its impact to the steam engine's role in the Industrial Revolution. And then he warned that overregulation could stifle innovation, saying, quote, it will never come to pass if overregulation deters innovators from taking the risks necessary to advance the ball. Now, the US further cemented that position by refusing to sign an international pledge on AI development, which was endorsed by over 60 countries, including China. That agreement commits signatories to ensuring AI is safe, transparent, and ethical. Vance's speech also kind of highlighted these increasing tensions between the US and Europe over AI regulation. And that kind of comes at an interesting time as the EU starts to enforce its AI Act. So, first, Paul, let's kind of talk about this speech itself. It's pretty short, but I would say despite being short, its impact has been pretty significant because some people in AI circles have been calling this one of the most pro-innovation, pro-AI accelerationist speeches they've ever heard from a politician, much less the Vice President of the United States. Like Vance basically comes out and says, we're accelerating. We want to either work with you, but if you don't want to work with us, get out of our way. So what did you make of this?
Yeah, so I think contextually, if people aren't aware, it's important to know who JD Vance is. So JD Vance is a former venture capitalist who was brought into political power by Peter Thiel, who co-founded PayPal with Elon Musk and was the first major investor in Facebook. And Peter Thiel was also the first Silicon Valley leader to support the Trump campaign in 2016. So Thiel has sort of like invested heavily in bringing politicians that sort of share his worldview into power and politics. So that's JD Vance as like a rough background, became a senator, became the vice president. So he has Silicon Valley ties, specifically this movement towards like open source and deregulation. So his background fits very well with this administration's focus on reducing regulation, putting AI safety concerns aside, as we talked about on last episode, massive investment in infrastructure, and accelerate at all costs. That is the Silicon Valley current mentality, and JD Vance represents that better than any politician right now. That is his MO. So I'll just go through like a couple of excerpts here that really caught my attention. It was a very, as you said, pro-acceleration, I guess would be one way to categorize this talk. Very pro-American. Again, I don't really know how to even like explain this talk. It is one of the bolder political speeches I have seen. So he says to restrict this development now would not only unfairly benefit incumbents in the space, but it would also mean paralyzing one of the most promising technologies we've seen in generations. This concept goes back to things we talked about last fall of 2024, this idea of regulatory capture, and that the incumbents would control what the regulations would be in their favor. And so small tech, startups, things like that wouldn't have the benefit of fair competition because the people like OpenAI would sort of set the parameters of what the regulations would be. He went on to say later, when a massive incumbent comes to us asking for safety regulations, we ought to ask whether that regulation benefits our people or the incumbent. I think he was talking to some specific people with those things. The thing that became very obvious when you read through this transcript is every single word is intentional. Like every word and every phrase, many of them have meaning behind them, but they're all extremely intentional. And so I think it's worth reading a few times through the transcript because you start to really see what they're saying. So he outlines 4 key things. That one, this administration will ensure that American AI technology continues to be the gold standard worldwide. We aim to be the partner of choice for foreign countries and businesses as they expand their use of AI. Number 2, We believe that excessive regulation of the AI sector could kill a transformative industry just as it's taking off, and we will make every effort to encourage pro-growth AI policies. Three, we feel strongly that AI must remain free from ideological bias and that American AI will not be co-opted into a tool of authoritarian censorship. I'll come back to that one. And finally, number four, the Trump administration will maintain a pro-worker growth path for AI so that it can be a potent tool for job creation in the United States. He said AI will facilitate and make people more productive. It is not going to replace human beings. I think, this again, him, I think too many leaders in the AI industry, when they talk about the fear of replacing workers, miss the point. AI will make us more productive, more prosperous, and more free. I'll come back to that one in a moment as well. He talked about like infrastructure and how this is one I was like, I think we're stretching here. It says the U.S. possesses all components across the full AI stack, including advanced semiconductor design, frontier algorithms, and transformational applications. The computing power the stack requires is integral to advancing technology. They do not acknowledge the fact that TSMC, which is in Taiwan, is fundamental to all of this. And, Taiwan, which China believes is part of China. That's a problem. That'll come up over the next 4 years a lot. Gets into regulation and the fact that the EU AI Act and the Digital Services Act is an impediment to U.S. technology companies, and they're not going to stand for it. So there were some veiled threats toward the EU for their current policies. Free speech, which is their, I don't know, code word is the right word, but like that's their language for we are not going to moderate anything online. So we've already seen this where Facebook couple weeks ago announced to their employees, Zuckerberg did, that they're removing moderation off of Facebook. They're basically going to rely on AI only. They're getting rid of human moderators. X is obviously the Wild West right now. There's no like real, and any information. So they literally said the administration will ensure that AI systems developed in America are free from ideological bias and never restrict our citizens' right to free speech. We can trust our people to think, consume information, develop their own ideas, and debate the open marketplace of ideas. So again, whether you support or don't support this concept, they're telling you point blank, we don't believe in moderation, and we will not allow our social networks within our country to do moderation. Basically, we were going to let anything, spread on there. And then the last one I wanted to just make sure we touched on is this idea of this future of work. And this is a really important thing. It's going to be the next main topic, and we're going to come back to this next week. So he said, finally, this administration wants to be clear about one last point. And again, everything's intentional, and this is the closing. We will always send our American workers in our AI policy. We refuse to view AI as a purely disruptive technology that will inevitably automate away our labor force. We believe AI will make our workers more productive, and we expect they will reap rewards with higher wages, better benefits, and safer, more prosperous communities. And then I bolded this one myself. The most immediate applications of AI involve supplementing, not replacing the work being done by Americans. Now, I'm going to postulate here, Mike, that most immediate was a very intentional phrase. So I made a note to myself, like most immediate is doing a lot of work in this sentence. So then he says, we believe that the U.S. labor force prepared to use AI to its fullest extent will attract the attention of businesses that have offshored some of these roles. I believe that. To accomplish this, the administration will ensure that America has the best trained workforce in the world. That would be amazing. Our schools will teach students how to manage, supervise, and interact with AI-enabled tools as they become part of everyday lives. That would be phenomenal. I think that's a great vision. As AI creates new jobs and industries, our government, business, and labor organizations have an obligation to work together to empower workers, not just in the U.S., but around the world. So I think it's really important on this last part, Mike, and then I'll kind of throw it back to you. This future work concept, this is something that just keeps coming up time and time again. And after I saw this talk last week, it sort of kind of like moved me to action, I guess you could say. I'm really, I've said this many times, I'm struggling tremendously with all of these leaders and now our own government leaders proclaiming that this is all just going to be fine and it's all just going to make more jobs. And there's no actual plan or vision for how that's going to happen. So if this final section happens, I will be the happiest person. Like if our schools are teaching it, if it's integrated into workforce, if we're driving literacy across companies and industries, if we're creating more jobs than we're destroying and not displacing workers, like I hope that is the future. My problem is no one has a plan for that future to be created. And so that's the thing where I feel like kind of like we did a few weeks ago with this AI literacy project, like at some point you just have to start doing something. Like
Yeah.
it's not enough for me to sit here and complain about this every week on the podcast versus like trying to do it. And so, I started working on something last week to try and like project out what are those jobs? Like what what could be created that we're not envisioning, versus these abstract things that every once in a while Sam Altman will respond to, or you'll hear
Yeah.
some other leader respond to. And so I think I made some progress, and I wanted to share it today, but we haven't fully tested it out yet. But we were able to build something that can help with this. I think at least start the conversation in different companies and industries. I shared it with Mike, and kind of Mike was able to do some testing on it. So stay tuned. Next week we should be able to actually have it publicly live and be able to talk about it on the show. But our whole effort is to try and like let's put some tangible ideas behind this. So if I'm a lawyer, or if I'm a marketer, or if I'm an accountant, or if I'm a consultant or an agency leader, like what are those jobs? Like that's the big question right now. Is like what jobs? Like let's try and envision this. We know what the models are going to do 1 to 2 years out. That's a known path. What jobs could possibly be created that don't exist today as these models get smarter and more generally capable? So that was what I set out to solve like last Wednesday. Like I said, I think I made progress. Like I think there's a way we can actually help move this conversation forward. So sort of stay tuned on that, I guess.
Yeah, it seems especially on jobs from what we know of this administration, he was walking a bit of a tightrope, right? Because there's a huge amount of populist rhetoric and sympathy that brought this administration into power, but also it's backed by people like Mark Andreessen, who I guarantee you do not share this view on labor. They are looking
They're
to
funding the building of
actively
AI agent companies to replace people.
100%. So I can very well see that this is an interesting line to keep towing. And yeah, I mean, it points out that there is no plan right now that is at least public.
Yeah, and I think I've mentioned this before. The AI timeline. We talked about in episode
Yeah.
87. I'll reference it again on the robotics conversation in a little bit here. But one of the things I said that could slow this progress down and this vision for this kind of like technologist acceleration in this future is societal revolt.
Yeah.
And I do think we're going to start to see piece of this. There's actually, I had a tweet from, this was on the 15th, from Suhail, who's the founder of Playground AI. And I'll put it in the show notes, Mike, and you can share it. He said, someone hung this on my door in San Francisco. People have lost their mind, accelerate humanity. And it was a placard, like a sign that says, stop AI. Like OpenAI is trying to build
Mm,
AGI. They define it as this. If nothing goes wrong, the majority of jobs will be lost to AI. Like, so
mm.
I mean, this is just one tweet, but like in San Francisco is starting to like form groups and post signs about like stopping AI. And I don't know, like it'll be interesting to follow this along, but now we have the government for the first time stating what we had seen, like Andreessen Horowitz and others be
Yeah.
stating.